Welcome to episode 8 of Mental Mastery, where I interview the world's greatest minds on what it takes to live a happy and successful life. I'm your host, Max Weigand. On today's show, I'm joined by Bill Eckstrom, whose hugely successful Tedx talk on seeking growth over comfort has received nearly 2 million views until now. Bill is also the founder and president of EcSell Institute, where he helps sales leaders and teams reach higher levels of growth. So Bill, welcome on the show.
Well, thank you, Max. It's an honor to be with you today.
So in your TEDx talk, which is titled Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life, you share this very powerful story of your own life, of how you learned that it's not discomfort, but comfort that we must fear. So can you share that story maybe with our audience to give them a better idea of who you are and where you come from?
Sure. Are you referring to the story where I lost my job?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I was rehashing that again this morning with a friend of mine. It's something which is interesting to put it this way. It's taken me 10 years to become even comfortable to share that story.
Wow.
But it's humbling. It's not something you want to go share to the world. Gee, I got fired, But I don't know, it was so unexpected at the time. I'd never, and maybe it tells you a little bit about me, but I just hadn't faced that kind of adversity. I was used to winning. I was used to succeeding. And when you walk in to the president's office, and I mean, quite literally just totally 100% unexpected, when he just says, hey, we're making some changes and you're not part of them and you no longer have a job. That's a very humbling moment. And so I had to go back and share that with my wife, share that with my kids, which was not easy to do. And I think the hardest thing, Max, was to get up the next morning at the start of what ended up to be the greatest recession we've had since the Great Depression here in our country, and say, I got to go earn money and go find a way to keep my family going. So anyway, that's how my journey into discovery of all this started.
Wow, that must have been a very painful moment. So in that moment when you get fired, when you have to walk home to your family and your kids and your wife and admit like, hey, I lost my job. So what was it that like kind of got you through that moment, that helped you stay positive and helped you move on from that?
So I've never shared this with anybody, and I'll share it with you now.
Wow.
I left. So I did. I went home and I just kind of curled up in bed for a while. And then that night at dinner, I shared with the family, with my kids, I have a son and 2 daughters, what had happened. And I don't even remember how it came up, but something to the effect of, for example, I had to now go buy my own computer. I had to go, all those things that the company had provided you, just little things. And again, I don't remember the poignancy of how that came up. But what I do remember is my oldest daughter, who I believe would have been roughly middle schooler, 8th or 9th grade.
Okay.
I came up to my room that night to go to bed after the conversation at dinner, how the next day Dad had to go buy his own computer now. And on my pillow was my daughter's computer. And she had stuck a little note on there, which basically was, I want to give you my computer so you don't have to go spend the money to buy another one.
Wow.
And that kind of set me in motion to, wow, I need to be strong. I need to get up tomorrow. If she had the heart and the courage and was willing to sacrifice something like that, I could certainly do a lot more. So that was my impetus that was my motivator to get up the next morning and go make something else happen.
Wow, that is so powerful. So were you ever tempted to kind of like jump right back into like getting a job, like looking for a job, or were you right from the start where you like, I gotta like make something happen on my own, right? Because now you founded EcSell Institute. So was that like the first thought that came to your mind, or was it like more like trying to like, hold on to the old job or find something new?
Max, that's such a good question, because yes, I was immediately approached by a CEO of another publicly traded company who wanted to visit with me about taking over their sales, be their executive sales leader. And I have to admit, it was immediately attractive because it was money, and
Yeah.
I literally had no source of income outside of savings. And the last thing you want to do is deplete all that, right? So I set up a conversation with this gentleman over the phone, and so I think it was like 2 or 3 days later, and I got on the phone, and it hit me that I'm not going to put myself back into that situation. I will no longer have my future dictated by someone's perception of me, or perhaps market forces or anything like that. And so without even so much as starting the interview, I got on the phone. I said, listen, I so appreciate and am flattered that you would call, but I will not work for anyone else ever again.
I love that.
So it's not when I started the EcSell Institute, but that was my first epiphany of realizing that I will not put myself back in that position again. So I knew I was going to do something on my own, and it wasn't going to be working in a corporate environment.
Wow, I love that. And so then you start thinking about like, hey, what do I need to do? What did that process look like of like figuring out like, what else am I going to do, right? Because if you've spent your whole life in kind of corporate America, that must have been a huge blow, right? Like kind of all of a sudden standing there, like, I don't know what to do. So what did that process look like for you of like figuring out like, hey, this is what I want to do?
That's another very good question, Max. I immediately had a friend who needed some help with his sales department in his organization. And so I did some consulting work with him and did some training with their sales team. And it was enjoyable. It was challenging, but it wasn't passionately rewarding. And so I began to sit down with a series of friends and very wise people that would very prudently ask me questions. And there was a woman friend of mine who said, really, Bill, what it boils down to is you got two decisions. You've already decided you're not going to work for somebody. She said, I understand that. She said, so there's two routes to go. You can either A, be a consultant, be on your own, be kind of that lone wolf, go do your own deal, call your own shots, and you can make a very nice living doing that. Or you can go create a business. And you do that, you have other lives you're responsible for, there's bigger risks, so on and so forth. But it was at that point where I had my another epiphany, which was my passion is helping others, and helping others through business, not just from a consulting basis. I wanted others to be involved. Selfishly, I knew one of my greatest strengths is finding and attracting talent.
Okay.
And if I could do that, I could find people that could overcome the stuff I'm not good at. And so really it was at that moment where I realized, wow, she's right. It's not about making money as a consultant. It's about creating something that's more lasting. And so that's when I started the EcSell Institute.
Wow, that's such a great story, especially the point about like where you said you brought all these wise people around you, your best friends and maybe mentors. You brought them around you and had them basically ask you deep questions, had like them help you figure out what you want to do. I love that idea of just bringing like other people into that process of figuring out like, hey, what is my next step? Like, because I think other people oftentimes have like also many great ideas and maybe different insights on where you're great at, what you might want to do. So I love that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I continue to do because it's one of the ways I grow. It's one of the ways I develop. So it's hang out with people smarter than you, man. There's nothing more powerful. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, but there's certainly few things that are more powerful than that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why I'm doing these interviews here.
Good response, Max.
Yeah. So what moment? I mean, in the TEDx talk, you talk about the growth rings, and when you finally understood that it was that it's the discomfort that we must seek. So at what moment did you have that epiphany, or was it a gradual process of realizing hey, comfort is actually ruining my life?
The epiphany, there really wasn't an epiphany for discomfort. The epiphany, quite frankly, was the growth rings themselves.
Okay.
Which was really the epiphany of understanding how environments dictate our growth. The discomfort theme came through our research. We were continually finding, when we were studying high-performing coaches, high-performing managers, high-performing leaders in business, that there was, they created this, what we call a healthy discomfort. And we used to refer to it, we learned this from one of our friends and clients, healthy tension, healthy challenge, that was creating growth. But why? That's when the growth rings came about. When we were trying to understand why discomfort was creating growth, and worked all of those stagnation, order, complexity, which is discomfort, and chaos. So worked with a wonderful colleague, brilliant mind, Dr. Mary Woolbein at the University of Nebraska. And in our conference room one day, when we kind of stumbled on the verbiage, stumbled on the diagram, the growth rings, and that was our moment. So discomfort drove it, which is interesting. The whole reason we study discomfort, because it creates change, is really what drove the growth rings. So the growth rings didn't drive discomfort. Discomfort is what drove the growth rings.
Oh, wow. Okay. So can you tell me a little bit more about the growth rings, about how exactly they kind of interact and lead to each other?
Yeah. So the growth rings, as I say in the TED Talk, they represent environments that impact our growth, or goes for saying that dictate our growth. And every environment or culture, however you want to term it, that in which we exist, whether in these environments, it could be nature, our favorite athletic teams, our place of employment, our family environment. Every environment has falls into one of these four categories or a combination thereof. Stagnation, which is having to follow too many steps and permissions and minutia. We don't see a lot of it in business, although there are stories of stagnation, throughout history of businesses, amazing businesses that have failed quickly. Blockbuster being a great example of a business that had fallen into stagnation. Above stagnation is order, which is really, we spend a lot of time on in the TED Talk, and a lot of time when we work with groups. As a matter of fact, with the gymnastics coach this morning, we were visiting about order. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful yet dangerous environment to be. Order is knowing that what you do or what happens in your environment leads to a predictable outcome. And there's nothing wrong with order, but perhaps same with complexity, too much of it for too long is going to limit your growth, or it'll lead you to stagnation. So, we all have order in our lives, the way we get up in the morning, the way we drive to work, the way we think. But this is what's dangerous about order. It also impacts, we have an order to the way we think about things, the way we think about and treat people. And so order, because it leads to comfort, anytime outcomes are predictable, that's what creates comfort. And that's what makes order so dangerous, is when we become comfortable, we don't want to change it. And there's all kinds of stories about order that I could share, but that's really the gist of it. Is it's comfortable and we don't want to get out of it. Complexity or is what creates discomfort. Complexity is when order is changed. And anytime an order is changed, outcomes are unpredictable, and unpredictability is what leads to discomfort. Now, what's interesting is not all predictability creates discomfort, but Max, every bit of discomfort is created by complexity.
Wow.
And not complexity in the sense that it's hard to understand, but complexity in the sense that we can't predict outcomes.
Okay, so you're just in a situation where you're unsure of like what's going to happen next, what I need to do, like kind of what's going on, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, that could be considered a complex environment. And there's a distinction between things that are complex and complexity. For you ever seen an airplane cockpit in this example? I think I read it in Harvard Business Review, but it makes such perfect sense. It looks so challenging.
Oh, hell yeah.
It looks so complex, and it is complex, but it's not complexity. Complexity is unknown outcomes. Actually, an airplane cockpit is very ordered. So things can be complex, but not a complexity environment. And I just wanted to make that distinction.
Okay, so it's about the kind of predictability of what's going to happen, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, exactly. We can't, we make decisions, we go into complexity environments with the hope of an outcome, but ultimately we don't know. And certainly the downstream impact of complexity, we have no control over. It's the classic of, butterfly flaps its wings in Argentina and we have a hurricane in the Gulf. So there's a downstream impact that's caused anytime we enter complex environments. And I use the example of Claudette Colvin in my TED Talk. But there's no way when Claudette wouldn't get off her seat on the bus that she ever thought she'd be testifying in front of the United States Supreme Court. I guarantee you that's not something that crossed her mind, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
But the downstream impact of complexity can be significant, but there's always downstream impact.
What's really interesting is like that it's this really complex environment or complexity full environments that lead to the most growth, that lead to outcomes that are oftentimes out of our comfort zone. And so I'm really curious, how do you kind of strike the balance between comfort and discomfort? Because comfort, like you said, is very important to grow and to become better. But at the same time, if we experience too much discomfort, if there's too much pain, if there's too much chaos and confusion in our lives, we can also get overwhelmed. So how can we find that kind of balance between those two?
Oh, Max, that's such a good question. Well, first of all, I need to say that it depends on the individual. Everybody's order and complexity are different. And when we study high-performing teams, Max, we see there is a healthy balance of order. We can't live a life of complexity. We just can't. So part of it is self-awareness, first of all, is understanding, recognizing and acknowledging that a feeling of discomfort is not bad. And don't get me wrong, it is a physical feeling. When discomfort hits, it is a physical feeling, and it's usually stomach related. You'll feel it somewhere in your gut, and that's the way people describe it. So acknowledging it is the first step, and then really once I acknowledge it, making conscious decisions that, hey, if we acknowledge it, we can understand from where it originates by and large. And then we can make conscious decisions to either pursue it, knowing that there's growth on the other end. But there's often times we don't want to pursue it, or we perhaps shouldn't pursue it. And there's times, quite literally with myself, there's I'm posed with maybe it's a speaking opportunity, or whether it's a physical activity. My brother-in-law wanted me to go on a backpacking camping trip this August up to Colorado. And while that sounds cool, and I know it's going to create physical discomfort, I'll grow as a result of it. I just don't want to do it. There's just other things I'm going to do. But likewise, then to get back to your question of how do we find that balance? I pay people to help me find that balance. So, for example, recently I've hired a personal trainer. I've never done that in my life because I want someone else's viewpoint. I want someone to really push my levels of comfort and discomfort. And so I need somebody to help me do that. I have a personal coach. Her name's Kathy. And Kathy challenges the way I think, the way I go about and live my business life. And she does a really nice job of helping me balance my what brings comfort in my business and what brings discomfort and growth to my business. So it's not only something I try and acknowledge and balance myself, Max, but I pay others to be a part of my life to help me do that as well.
Yeah, it definitely seems like mentorship is like a recurring theme here of like where you find people that may have more expertise in a certain subject that can then share their expertise with you, share their kind of outside view in order to help you kind of look at things more objectively. So I think that's a very interesting point you're making here, but kind of like finding people to push you through that edge so you can be right at that edge of like complexity and like discomfort and growth, but where it's not going too much into the side of like chaos and confusion. So I think that's a really good point.
And it really circles back to how we started this conversation, Max.
Exactly.
Sitting down with people wiser or people that think differently. Two people come to mind. There's a gentleman in Lincoln by the name of Dr. Larry Widman, who's a sports psychiatrist, and ironically, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Jensen, who's works with Olympic athletes in Canada, who's a sports psychologist.
Wow.
And those are people, when you have an opportunity to sit down with people like them, I mentioned this morning, I sat down with the women's gymnastics coach at the University of Nebraska, Heather Brink. To learn from those people, to see the world through their eyes, it provides such an amazing opportunity to learn and to open our own minds up. So I think we need to do more of that. Because the way they respond is not always the way you want to hear it.
Exactly.
But it's certainly, if you can quit trying to tell people the way you think or the way you believe and just listen and say the words, tell me more, or help me understand those amazing growth opportunities.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've seen this with this podcast already. I mean, this is my 8th interview now, and I've learned so many things over the first 7 interviews already of just perspective changes, that people have with like they're successful, they're happy, they have a whole different mindset than other people. And so learning from those people, whether they actually studied it as professors or they kind of learned it through their own life, sort of like you with the growth, is, I think, so invaluable because you can add like decades of experience to your own life simply by listening and learning from people. So mentorship is definitely a big one. I love that. So tell me a little bit more. I'm really curious because you touched upon athletics or the hike a little bit before. And I think in athletics, especially whether it's going to gym or for me, it's running. I shared with you before. I ran cross country in college. In athletics, it's sort of normal. It's expected sort of even to feel discomfort, to feel pain, to sort of acknowledge it as like a necessary component of our lives as athletes, right? Why is it so different in our lives? Because if an athlete, like you expect to struggle, right? Like I'm not going to go outside and go for an easy 1 mile run. Like I know like if I want to improve, if I want to get better, I have to do, my 2 hard tempo workouts a week. I have to do a long run of like 15, 16 miles every week in order to get better. And somehow that doesn't translate to our lives oftentimes, right? Because in our lives, oftentimes any type of discomfort, we're like, this is wrong. So why do you think that is, that like in athletics, we accept that like pain is growth, but in our lives, we oftentimes kind of run away from that?
And I don't have any data on this, so this is opinion, Max.
Oh, that's totally cool.
I'm not sure And see, I'm not sure what you said is exactly accurate, meaning that when I find people in the workplace, I love to hire former athletes. I love to hire people that have faced adversity, whether it's in athletics or in life, because I think it does translate. I think they can't perhaps articulate it, but they behave in the way because of their past history of being able to overcome adversity. They have a better work ethic. So there's a lot of things that play into it. Now, I'll talk out of the other side of my mouth, and there's a lot of people that have not been able to make that transition, who they acknowledge it in athletics, but for some reason they can't make it apply to life. In other words, I'm going to, all the things, all the mental and physical strengths that I have to achieve what I achieved athletically, I'm not putting the same ones to use, perhaps professionally or in my life. And I don't know why. Max, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's certainly a different, interesting observation that you're making. I would definitely have to agree, because I think maybe from an athlete's perspective, so maybe sometimes I think we get so focused on our athletic goals that, especially in college, many people kind of forget about school and all the other stuff. We're so focused on I want to run a certain time, I want to win this match or whatever it is, that I think oftentimes we don't bring the same motivation and discipline to studying for exams or anything. So that might be part of it, but it's definitely interesting.
Well, how much of it could also be people haven't found a similar passion.
That is true.
Professionally that they had, perhaps athletically. That could certainly play a part of it too. I don't think, one of the things we need to do in those roles, and one of the things, and Coach Brink and I were visiting about this morning, but helping people understand themselves beyond their sport, I think is one of the things that we have to do as coaches, as mentors, both at work, professionally, athletically, in every aspect of life, is really help people understand beyond that moment, beyond that specific trade or profession or skill, what else is there? And maybe in athletics, we don't do that enough with people.
Oh, for sure. I agree. I mean, I think, especially in athletics, careers can be over so quickly. And oftentimes it's maybe a few years, and all of a sudden something happens and your career is over, and then you kind of stand there what next? So I think always already looking at the broader picture of what do I want my life to be like is, I think, very important.
Yes, that it is. That is very well said.
Yeah. So Bill, I'm really curious. So in your own life, do you have any rituals that kind of help you consistently go into discomfort? Do you have a daily or a monthly kind of journaling session or anything that makes sure that hey, this month I'm putting myself into discomfort, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Do you have anything like that?
And I always, you're good at asking questions. So
thank you.
There's a few things. So there have been few disciplines I've added to my life that I've never done before that have created discomfort in the sense that they have caused me to see the world differently, and that's challenging. And so a few of those things, which is really interesting. Number one, and as I mentioned, I've deliberately sought discomfort through external people's coaches. So personal trainer, the coach that I hire for myself and my business.
And by the way, sorry to interject, but is that to kind of push yourself more? Is that because you know that other people kind of put that demand on you, then you have to do it?
Okay, ask that again. Say that again.
So is that because you kind of want other people to place the demand on yourself, so you can't just kind of chicken out and say yeah, today I don't feel like it? Is that the reasoning behind it, or part of that?
No, I'm so obsessed with growth, Max, that I look at myself and think, am I growing? And then, am I walking the talk?
Yeah.
And in order to walk the talk is I think my first and foremost reason for getting my personal coach, is I had to live that.
For sure.
So I think that's the primary reason there. But in terms of rituals, yeah. So here's what I started to do. Number one, a couple of years ago, I started to meditate. Mm-hmm. And that meditation, which I do probably 5 days a week, combined with morning journals, and that's evolved to some degree. But those two items allow me to stop and reflect, and they have so profoundly impacted my day that those two items. And then what it's caused me to do is to continue to learn about things like being present, mindfulness. Those components, all those things combined, have had the largest impact on my personal growth ever. So I can tell you that I'm in my 50s, and I don't feel like I've ever grown more in my life than I have here these last 2-3 years.
Wow. That's incredible.
So I can do it in my 50s. Anybody can do it at any age.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I love that. And I think you shared another talk that like you still expect like your best years to be in front of you. Like you still expect that like your best is still up, right? Like in the future, right? So I love that.
It is. Yeah. I don't believe, somebody asked me one time about, what's your best moment? And it's yet to come.
I love that. Cause I mean, you've done so many incredible things already. So.
Well, thank you. Got a long ways to go. Journey.
Yeah, I love that. So Bill, I'm really curious. You mentioned a journaling session before, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. So is there a set of questions that you ask yourself every morning that kind of like help you reflect on your life and maybe how you want to live that day? Or what does that look like?
Max, it's evolved. So when I first started to do it, I can't remember whether a friend told me about it or I read about. So what I started to do every morning is I would get up and open my computer, pull up a Word document, and write down 5 things I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
And that, as easy as it sounds, started off easy, but then you get a few weeks into it and you're like, well, I already wrote about that, or I wrote about that, or I mentioned that. And it makes you think really, really hard. And instead of searching for things that, I've got to do this today, or here's a challenge I have to overcome today, or here's my to-do list. All those things that I used to start my day with. Now I'm starting my day with forcing myself to identify things that I'm grateful for. And then what I would do is I would go back and inevitably read some of the prior things I had written. Mm-hmm. And it might be something like, I'm grateful for the way my dog Aspen puts her head on my leg when she wants to be petted. I'm grateful for the taste of the first sip of coffee in the morning. I'm grateful for the way Kathy at work smiles when I see her. There are all kinds of things and so not only do you write them down, but then you go back and read what you've written down previously. You can't read it all, but and all of a sudden I'm smiling.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering that the way it feels when she sets her head on my leg. And now I'm starting my day in a completely different way. So that's how my morning journaling began. And what it's evolved to, Max, and this I came from my coach, I do now what's called a brain download. So every morning I get up and I just download thoughts. I literally close my eyes and begin to type. That's what I do. And it's amazing what comes out. Everything from colors to things I hear to things I feel to thoughts. And it just creates a sense of stillness, of presence, mindfulness. There's just a lot of good things that come from it. So it started one way, it's evolved, and hopefully it will continue to evolve.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting, especially the part about being mindful. I mean, I feel like what you said about being grateful and all these examples you gave, it sounds like it is just really forcing you to be mindful, not just in that moment, but then throughout the whole day to really realize and like acknowledge, that sip of the cup of coffee. Like, I think most of the times we go through life and we don't really acknowledge and experience those things, right? Those events. And it really sounds like you're kind of forcing yourself to really live those things, to really be mindful of what you're actually doing and what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, and that's exactly. And I didn't go into it with that in mind, just so you know. But it's what I've realized is the output of it. So it's really been a wonderful journey.
Oh, that sounds great. Definitely worth doing that too. So one thing I'm really curious about before we wrap this up, I know you're tight on time. So since the growth rings, how have you learned to kind of reframe problems or just obstacles in your way? Have you found a way to kind of look at them in a different way?
Max, the growth rings have they've impacted the way I coach. They've impacted the way I parent. They've impacted the way I see the world. They've impacted how I operate within the world. They've impacted pretty much everything I do because I can look at it in terms of what kind of environment am I in? Mm-hmm. And knowing that ultimately I have a control over the environment that I'm in. If I see, I will avoid chaotic and stagnation environments like the plague.
Oh, for sure.
Because I just know that they create such a discomfort. And this is what we refer to as unhealthy discomfort that stifles growth. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be in those environments. To know that we were talking, the coach and I were talking this morning about becoming comfortable with discomfort. And that's a term now we even use professionally here in our office. I've heard Anna, our director of marketing, say, Bill cares enough to make me uncomfortable. Think about the power of that phrase.
Wow, yeah.
Areas and situations where I used to consider myself a fix-it guy. I use the story of my daughter in tennis in the TED Talk. And I mean that quite literally. Several years ago, I would have viewed her pain, her discomfort as an opportunity for me to go remove it, instead of allowing her the privilege, which through her eyes at the moment, it's not privilege, right?
Yeah.
But when people are in what I'll call healthy discomfort, we owe them the courtesy. Do not rob them of that moment. To rob them of the moment is to limit their growth. And professionally, to recognize and acknowledge when those healthy opportunities are there, and instead of removing them, to let the people work through them and know that the other side is growth related. So that I would say is how the growth rings have impacted me. I could go on and on, but those are some of the more poignant ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. There's such a powerful perspective shift of actually robbing people of their ability to grow if you're taking away that healthy discomfort. I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow. So before I ask my final question, Bill, where can people connect with you online?
Oh, I love it. I love how people connect with me online. What's interesting? I can't even tell you how many times since the TED Talk I have been reached out to now on either Twitter or LinkedIn.
Oh, I believe that.
Facebook, and I can proudly say I have responded to every single person who's ever asked me a question or to connect. And so if someone wants to take the time to connect with somebody, why wouldn't we do that? I mean, there's so much gold there. So on LinkedIn, just Bill Eckstrom. It's ECKSTROM. The name of our company is the EcSell Institute. EcSell is, however, spelled ECSELL, the EcSell Institute. Twitter, I'm just at Bill Eckstrom. You can find me on Facebook. You can email me at beckstrom@excellinstitute.com. I love to connect with people. I really do. So anybody can reach out to me and get a hold of me.
Awesome. I'll definitely put those links in the show notes as well. So my final question is, what does mental mastery mean to you?
Mental mastery is, there is no such thing. Mental mastery is, the way I would view it, is commitment to a journey. Because at no time, if anyone ever says, I have my mental health mastered, anytime we think we have something mastered, Max, we quit growing.
That's true.
So mental mastery is a commitment to a journey that never ends. That's how I see it.
I love that.
And if we commit to that journey, we'll always grow. So that's how I see mental mastery.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's episode of Mental Mastery. Tune in daily for new episodes on how you can achieve mental mastery and live a happy and successful life. And if you would like a little extra push, head over to my website, maxweigand.com, for a free ebook on mastering self-discipline and willpower. There, you can also sign up for my one-on-one habit coaching program, where I help you master your habits and achieve your goals. Also, if you like this interview, feel free to rate and review the show. Until next time,